Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, geeks and nerds and ambassadors everywhere, and welcome back to the Ambassadorial Wing and another installment of the Ambassadors, yours truly, Modern Pop Review. And as always, if this is your first visit to the Ambassadorial Wing, I hope you enjoy your time here. I hope you enjoy your stay, and I hope you enjoy the discussion. And if this is your first visit, and you like what I'm and you enjoy the stream, consider hitting that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. That way you know when I go live or when I upload a video, and become a part of this community. Because here we celebrate, we discuss, and we debate pop culture. And tonight we're going to be discussing a favorite film of mine from, as I said, the modern era. Robert Zemeckis' Beowulf. But of course, this is not necessarily Robert Zemeckis' Beowulf, because Beowulf is quite literally one of the oldest written tales in English literature. And tonight, we're going to discuss a little bit of the history of the story itself. We're going to talk about the talent, namely the actors, the actresses who are a part of this production. We're going to talk about why I love this film. And we're just going to have a good time this evening, because it has been it is Saturday. It's Saturday night. Okay, to quote one of my favorite movies, it's Saturday night, it's time to party. And granted, I am not Wayne Campbell, nor am I Garth Algar, but I hope that you have a most excellent and awesome time this evening tonight as we break down all things Beowulf. So, with all that being said, we don't stand on a lot of ceremony here, so let's get right into the discussion. Robert Zemeckis' Beowulf. Now, a little personal history on this movie. I did see this film when it came out back in 2007. And it is very much so a personal favorite of mine. I actually went to see this with a good friend of mine from high school. We would periodically, every few months or so, we'd get together, have dinner, go check out a movie, or just hang out, whatever. And on this particular occasion, I asked him, I was like, hey, you want to go check I was like, I've seen the trailer for this movie. It looks really, really kick-ass. And it looks like it might be a really good bro date film. And he's like, sure, let's go. And I had to admit, we went to see it in IMAX. And not just IMAX, but IMAX 3D. And it was a sight to behold, because you had the opening title with honestly a truly epic and awesome score. And it's one of those scores that gets your blood pumping. And I think the score for this version of Beowulf it's really visceral. It's the type of score that if you're a guy, it just gets your blood pumping. And the movie itself, it is a bro film. Now, granted, if you're a lady, you can definitely watch this film. You would probably enjoy it just as much. But it was kind of geared towards a particular audience, and there's not anything necessarily wrong with that. But me and my buddy, we went and saw the movie, and we were just sitting there. We were just like, this is kick-ass as all hell. You've got dudes running around on horseback, hacking and slashing at giant monsters. You've got a guy swimming in the middle of the ocean fighting giant monsters. And you're just like, this is badass. Now, one of the other things I will comment on in terms of Beowulf, this was another attempt to do photorealistic CGI characters or performers. And I've covered another movie that's very well known for that. Of course, is Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, which came out, I believe, in either 1999 or 2000, somewhere along in there. And Zemeckis wanted to take another stab at doing photorealistic CGI. And I have to say, comparing Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within to Beowulf, I think they did a much better job on the skin textures, on the hair, and on the clothing. Now, obviously, you can tell that this is CGI, but it's more realistic looking CGI. The thing that they did with this film in comparison to, say, well, no, I think they did something similar, but they used an early version of a volume or stagecraft or whatever you want to call it now, but they use it more so for CGI work rather than background and things like that, like what we have with The Mandalorian and the other MCU live action series that Disney has been putting out. But with Beowulf, you get a real sense of scale and age and just how the setting of this world, it's very hard, it's very cold, it's very lived in. If I remember correctly, the setting or the year for this film is 607 AD. And that is right around the time that the oral tradition for Beowulf did begin, and then eventually it was transferred over to the written word. Now, as I mentioned, Beowulf is if not the oldest written stories in existence. And the story itself, the book itself, can be a bit dry. But at the same time, the story itself is very timeless if you kind of boil it down to its base essence. And it's essentially the story of a hero. And of course, the hero in this case is Beowulf. And you have a very interesting adaptation of Beowulf from Zemeckis, because it does differ from the original story in certain ways, particularly Beowulf's journey. Now, the thing I will say is, do I have a problem with an adaptation of the story of Beowulf? No, because there have been several adaptations of the Beowulf tale throughout history, and particularly since um, the advent of movie making. I can remember another one. It was somewhat low budget to varying degrees that starred Christopher Lambert in the titular role of Beowulf. And it was actually, if I remember correctly, set in the future. But what I like about this particular version of Beowulf, it is set in the proper setting. It's set in Northern Europe. Granted, it wasn't known as Northern Europe at that time because Europe as a country didn't necessarily exist. You had all these somewhat isolated kingdoms and so on. And that's how the world is established, is you have kingdoms ruled over by various nobles or individuals or whatever the case may be. And in this particular instance, the the kingdom is ruled over by old Hrothgar. And of course, you have, I think, you have an exemplar cast for this film. And in doing my research for this film, and obviously knowing this movie as well as I do, I was very pleasantly surprised to revisit this movie because it had been a while since I watched it. I watch this movie maybe once or twice every couple of years, give or take. And you have, like I said, you have a stellar cast in this movie. You have, of course, Anthony Hopkins as Hrothgar, the king. You have Angelina Jolie as Grendel's mother. You have Ray Winstone, who had a bit of a spurt in popularity in movies for a little while. He was in, um, obviously, he was in this film. He was also in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom and the Crystal Skull. You have Robin Wright. You have John Malkovich. You, of course, have Brendan Gleeson as Beowulf's right hand man. And just those, and of course, you also have Crispin Glover as the voice actor for Grendel, the monster. Now, the other thing I will say about this movie, in terms of the cast, they were real troopers to go into this because some of these actors, particularly with Anthony Hopkins, he wasn't extremely old, but he was getting up there. And the rigors of doing motion capture acting, particularly early on for CGI work, was very labor intensive because they had to get into the suits, the mocap suits. They had to have the motion trackers put on their face and hands, and so on. But Hopkins and the rest of the cast did, I think they did a bang up job in doing their performances for this movie. Now, of course, you have, like I said, you have Angelina Jolie as Grendel's mother, and Angelina Jolie at this point in her career, she was trying to segue away from the more sultry and seductive roles, but for this particular film, she did play that part. I think she played it very well. The other thing I will say is the take that Robert Zemeckis has on this particular story is an interesting one. Now, he does keep some of the basic elements of the story, but he kind of takes a different turn with it. Rather than showing Beowulf as just the hero, the pure ethical moral hero, he adds depth and complexity to the character, and I really appreciate that fact. And that's true of all the characters in this story, in this movie. And speaking of characters, and I say this with great respect, my good friend, my fellow council member, Mountains of Elysium. It is good to see you. I know it's rather late over your part of the world, so I appreciate you stopping by, giving the stream a like. Hope you have a good night. Hope you have a good weekend, and my regards to the family. You all have a good one, and I'll talk. Obviously, be talking to you later. So, but you also have, I mean, you have John Malkovich, another one of my, honestly, I say this with no hyperbole whatsoever, one of my all-time favorite actors, because he has done some movies I absolutely love. And his character in this movie has a very interesting arc because he is a early adherent or follower of the Christian community or the Christian movement. And I find I will say the humor is not lost on me when his character of Unferth is first introduced, and they're standing at a, well, I'll call it as it is, a piss trough. He's holding the end of his robe or tunic in his teeth, and he's explaining the concept of salvation through Jesus Christ to another um guy. And I'm like, you're staying there taking a leak, and you're talking about having your soul saved by belief in Jesus Christ. It would be the first urinal conversion, I would imagine. But you do get hints of early Christianity or the early Christian movement in this movie. And I cannot say I disapprove of that, not just because I am myself a Christian, but you don't see, I mean, obviously this is still a very pagan um culture. There's references to Odin and to Heimdall and so on. And a lot of the Norse pantheon, which would be accurate for the setting. If this is in Norway or, uh, well, yeah, more likely Norway, that would be very accurate here. And I have to say, the design for the world itself, as I mentioned, it's very hard. It's very brutal because, well, that part of the world is very hard and brutal. It's very cold. And you have the warmth and vibrancy of the interior of the hall, the mead hall that Rothgar has built, which he calls Harrod, or which is named Harrod. And it all seems very it all seems very realistic. And honestly, I appreciate the effort that they took in recreating or attempting to recreate this world, or in particular, our world at this particular point in its history and its development. And I want to send a shout to the chat, Multiverse of Movies. Isaac, it is good to see you, buddy. Appreciate you popping in. Hope you're having a good weekend. Hope you're having a good night. And hope you enjoy the discussion. Hope you enjoy the stream. I might drop the link here in a little bit for anybody that might want to join me for this discussion. I know this is a movie that not a lot of people may be terribly familiar with. So if you're just willing to tune in to listen to my take on it and find out whether or not this movie is worth giving a watch, well, I'll say it up front right here, right now. Yes, I think this movie is worth giving a watch if you've never seen it. Like I say, it came out in 2007. It was kind of a sleeper hit. It didn't do bank. It didn't do big bank at the box office. The budget for it was, hang on, give me just a minute here. The budget for it was $150 million, and it did just like 4 million of under $200 million. Now, I would imagine it has probably made more money in terms of home video sales and so on. This is a Warner Brothers property, and is also a Paramount Pictures. So I imagine you could probably find this movie on streaming either on HBO Max or on Paramount Plus if you want to check it out there. Now, I myself, I have it on DVD. I haven't had a chance to see if it's on Blu-ray as of yet. I would imagine it probably is. But if you want a good action-packed film that tells a very different story than what you maybe come to, this is definitely worth a look. Like I said, the CGI for the time, the photorealistic CGI at this time when this movie was made is actually quite good. Obviously, as I mentioned, the cast is also very good as well. It is by no means a weak cast by any stretch. Like I said, you've got Anthony Hopkins, you've got Angelina Jolie, you've got John Malkovich, you've got Robin Wright, you've got Ray Winstone, who, like I said, he wasn't a big name, and I don't know how what he's done in his career since this movie, or since Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but for his part as Beowulf, he really, I think, does a good job capturing the essence of the character. And I think that's true of all the actors in this film. They all do a good job capturing the essence of the characters they're performing. But to get a little bit more into the tech side of this. Now, this, as I mentioned, was somewhat of a daunting production. Not a difficult production per se, because Robert Zemeckis is not known to be someone that's difficult to work for in terms of a director, as I understand it. As I know, as to the research I have done on him, he seems like the type of director that most actors don't mind working with. But he's very selective about his projects. I mean, the other project that he's obviously most well known for is, of course, the Back to the Future trilogy. That's Back to the Future, Back to the Future Part 2, Back to the Future Part 3. I imagine he has done some other things in his career. I haven't had a chance to look them up, but based simply on the Back to the Future franchise, I don't mind giving his stuff a chance. And that's one of the reasons why I did go check this out. But to get back to my point, the making of the film. This took a lot of time and a lot of effort to get made because obviously there had been a lot of advancements in CGI work since the late 1990s and well with movies like Toy Story and so on, and even like I mentioned before, Final Fantasy 7 or Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. But even so, what Zemeckis was attempting to do was to tell or create a photorealistic environment for the story that he was telling or his adaptation of Beowulf. Now, what they referred to as the volume was something I had seen before for other CGI, for other motion caption CGI movies. One I can recall is, of course, a little film that I really enjoyed. It's called Monster House, which stars Steve Buscemi and a cast of younger actors and everything because it deals with a well, if you're familiar with the movie, it's it's a monster movie, but from a kid's perspective. Almost think of it like Goonies and Halloween in a lot of ways, but in this case, the monster is real. So, but what they did with this in making this film is they had the actors in this space that was surrounded by dozens of cameras, hundreds, if not thousands, of motion detectors to pick up all of the movements that the various actors were doing at any given moment. And then all of that data was transferred over into computers for the animators to go in and render. And that itself, as you can imagine, was a very daunting task as well. But I say this with no bias. The final product is actually very good. These characters are more for realistic than anything we had seen previously, honest in my honest opinion. And while I can never pretend to be able to have the talent to do CGI animation in the on the level that the animators for this film did, I can appreciate their efforts. Now, you might ask, does the uncanny valley play a part in this movie? I don't think so. At least not to my perspective. Now, I understand in terms of the uncanny valley, different people are going to have different sensitivities to it. Whereas when we look at a photorealistic character on a TV show or in a movie or whatever the case may be, we're going to react differently. So for myself, just speaking for myself, obviously. When I looked at these characters on the big screen, obviously in IMAX, the biggest format that we have currently, and even on our uh, 50 or 60 inch 4K high def television, the it doesn't bother me. It does the uncanny valley doesn't affect me. Let me put it that way. And but obviously I can see that they modeled the appearance of the characters after the actors that portrayed them. Obviously, Rothgar looks like Anthony Hopkins. Beowulf bears a resemblance to Weinstein because Weinstein at the time he was somewhat of a bigger fella, and he unfortunately couldn't drop enough weight to be the version of Beowulf that we see in the final project of the movie. Um, John Malkovich, he looks like Unferth. Now, and obviously Angelina Jolie looks like a version of Grendel's mother. Let's put it that way, because we get glimpses of Grendel's mother in her true form, and it's not anything all that seductive or even beautiful. It's actually rather monstrous and rather ghastly and very ugly, to be blunt. But when Grendel's mother is in her seductress form, it does look like Angelina Jolie. And I have to admit, all the characters in this movie, there's a lot going on with each one of them. They're not as cut and dry as they may appear. Now, I will say, obviously, there's going to be spoilers for this review. This is a relatively old movie. I mean, let's see, it came out in 2007 to 17, would be 10 years. 19, 20, 21, 22. This movie's about 15 years old, give or take. So, just heads up now, there's going to be spoilers for this movie in my discussing of it. As I mentioned before, the original tale of Beowulf does exist in this adaptation, but what Roberts and essentially it boils down to this: a kingdom is being plagued by a monster. The king of this kingdom calls for people to come and kill the monster and save his kingdom, and he will give them a reward for their efforts. And eventually Beowulf shows up, kills the monster, gets the reward, and in the original version, he ends up going home. Now, in this particular adaptation, Robert Zemeckis and the storytellers decided to go in a somewhat different direction. And that, as I mentioned before, it doesn't bother me because the changes that are made to the story, I think, add a lot of depth and a lot of flavor and a richness to this to our oldest living story, or not oldest existing story. Put story. Let's put it that way. Now, in this particular version, Beowulf's reputation and his character are actually called into question, and the allegations are made by Unferth, Rothgar's advisor and his war chief. Uh, I think would be the best way to explain his position in Rothgar's court. And this particular version of Beowulf isn't just the pure shining hero. He isn't the knight on the white horse and the shining armor. He is human. He is imperfect. And it's because of his own errors and in some instances his own pride that his kingdom is beset by a monster once again. It's essentially a vicious cycle that repeats itself. But what you have at play in the background of this movie is the transition from a pagan culture to a Christian one. And I cannot say that that is, as I mentioned earlier, that is not lost on me, because it is. It isn't lost on me. As a Christian, as a person of belief, Christian within the Christian community, seeing a story that parallels Christian belief with pagan is intriguing to me, because you have the dichotomy of one or two individuals that belong to the Christian community existing in a very pagan community. The majority of the people that live under Hrothgar's reign are pagan. He himself is pagan. And even he isn't like super duper pagan to any extent. One line that when Grendel attacks Hrothgar's kingdom, Unferth makes a comment to Hrothgar and says, "Should we perhaps pray to the Christian God, Christ Jesus?" And he makes mention that certain people within the kingdom are making sacrifices to Odin and Heimdall. And Hrothgar says, "No, the gods will not do anything for us that we cannot do ourselves." He's like, "What we need is a hero." And in this particular time in the world, heroes still did exist of various notoriety and so on. Now, we don't have any specific written record of any people like this, and we don't have any necessarily any written record of there being monsters that still roam the world, because Beowulf is first and foremost a folktale, a legend. But as is often said, within every legend, within every folktale, there's a nugget of truth. Now back to the whole parallel between Christianity and paganism within this story. Grendel and his mother are referred to as demons. They're referred to as monsters, which is not terribly. They're referred to as evil spirits, just with physical bodies. And none of these descriptors are necessarily inaccurate by any stretch, because that's essentially what they are. But with Grendel, what Robert Zemeckis does is he ties the monster directly to Hrothgar's kingdom and to Hrothgar himself. It's never shown on screen, but there are several allusions to the fact that Hrothgar was seduced or did succumb to Grendel's mother's charms. And Grendel is the byproduct of their passions. Let's put it that way. So essentially, Grendel is Hrothgar's son, and his son is causing him all this grief and heartache and pain and death and misery in his own kingdom. All because Hrothgar could not restrain himself. Now, it does introduce a very interesting question. How does humanity interact with the supernatural? Do we succumb to it or do we flee from it? Now, more often than not, the normal person, when confronted with the supernatural, does oftentimes get away from it, particularly if it's malevolent. And I would describe Grendel's mother as a malevolent force, most definitely. And not only does she had she seduced Hrothgar in the past, but when Beowulf goes to confront her, he's unable to kill her because she makes him these very grandiose promises which she can carry out, but there's always a price tag attached. And in Beowulf's case, the bargain that he strikes with her is that he will have the greatest story ever told written about him. That long after he is nothing but dust, his name and his legend will live on. And, well, there's truth to that. Now, whether that is due in part to some bargain that the person of Beowulf, whether he exists or not, actually made this bargain or not, we can never truly say. But what we can say in terms of the story of Beowulf is it has endured for centuries. Literally centuries. No hyperbole or anything in this case. But it also asks the question, what is a person willing to give up for fame, for notoriety, for glory, to put it in the context of this story? And in Beowulf's case, he's willing to sacrifice the safety and security of everyone around him, not just for fame and for notoriety, although that is also a very big part of the bargain that Grendel's mother makes with him. But it's also part of Beowulf's lust, because there's an interesting wrinkle in this story, because Hrothgar has a wife, and whether it's due to the fact that she refuses to sleep with Hrothgar or because of a after effect of Hrothgar sleeping with Grendel's mother, with sleeping with that particular demon, he is unable to father any heirs. So once Beowulf returns and makes claim that he killed both not only Grendel but Grendel's mother, Hrothgar says that his kingdom will be his once he dies. And after making it, a little while later, after making that proclamation, Hrothgar walks off the battlement of his castle and falls to the cliffs and dies. And therefore, Beowulf inherits Hrothgar's kingdom and also his wife. But it's a as I mentioned earlier, it's a vicious cycle. Because Beowulf's own weakness, his own pride, his own lust will also lead to his downfall and a lot of ruin and destruction within his own kingdom. Now, to kind of shift back a little bit to the conversation on paganism interacting with Christianity. At a point in the film, Beowulf is talking with his best friend, his most trusted advisor, his captain of his guard of his knights, Wiglove, voiced by Brendan Gleeson, and Beowulf makes the statement: "All the monsters are gone now. The Christian God has driven out all the myths and legends. We men are the monsters now." And Beowulf is speaking of himself. Now he is much older. a lot more grizzled, a lot more, I would say, disillusioned by the choices he has made. Because at a few points during the story earlier on, and when they first arrive in Hrothgar's kingdom, they're simply there to kill Grendel and then leave, go home. They'll collect their bounty from Hrothgar, and they'll be on their way home, which is how the original story goes. But as I mentioned, Zemeckis changes the narrative, and the change was not a bad one because it gives a very good commentary on the nature of humanity, and it's honestly a timeless one, and I appreciate that fact. Because we as human beings are oftentimes victims of our own passions, our pride, and all those vanities that we oftentimes succumb to. And honestly, I think this particular story is a good vehicle to tell this type of story for the simple fact that it is timeless. As much so as the story of Beowulf, the legend of Beowulf itself is timeless. And, you know, I've made my comments about the performances by the actors and the actresses, and they are very good. The CGI technology, the advancements that were made in 2007 were very impressive. But strip that away and what do you have at its core? You have a story that itself is timeless, but also is given added context in the modern era, in the modern period now, whether it's 2007 or 2022 or another 100 years from now. The story of Beowulf will probably still be talked about, be discussed, be debated, everything across the board. And part of that conversation now will be Robert Zemeckis' addition to the legend of Beowulf. Give me some egg, guys. Need a drink. We as humans often have to deal with the idea of our own mortality and this question of, will we be remembered after we are gone? And I think this movie does address that. I think it addresses it rather well. Because even as renowned and respected, or maybe even a level of jealousy is held towards Beowulf, he realizes that he is but flesh and blood. He is a man, nothing more. He has done all of these amazing things. He has traveled around the world, as well the world was done at that time, slaying demons, killing monsters, going on these grand adventures that are told from place to place. I mean, if in when, as I mentioned earlier, when Beowulf first arrives in Hrothgar's kingdom, and he's there in Heorot with Hrothgar and his court, And John Malkovich's character, Unferth, makes reference to a swimming race or a contest between Beowulf and another hero, a guy named Brecca. Excuse me. And Beowulf says, yes, I swam against Brecca and I lost because I was fighting monsters. And we see this. We see these giant sea monsters trying to attack Beowulf and Brecca. Now, Brecca is able to escape. Beowulf has to hold them off, and because of his efforts, he loses the race. And Unferth makes the assertion that Beowulf is not worthy of his reputation, that he is a, well, as Unferth says it, a boastful fool. Now, Beowulf comes back at Unferth and says, well, I heard a story about you and where you killed your own brothers. Now, granted, I would say that what Unferth did was justified considering his brothers were trying to, and I will put it politely, assault their mother. I would say that Unferth was justified in doing what he did, even though in those days killing one's own family was frowned upon. I would say in our current time, maybe not killing your relatives, but most definitely turning them over to the authorities because of the crime that they have committed, most definitely. But I will say it does diminish Beowulf slightly because what Umferth did was not unjustified by any stretch. I think we all here, whether you are watching this live or you will catch us on the replay, I think we would all act similarly as Unferth did if we knew that a family member, particularly our mother, was being abused by either another family member or by a complete stranger. Now, our response might be different, but we most definitely would respond regardless. But it adds that scene right there adds to the complexity of Beowulf himself because he's not this unstoppable force of a hero. He does lose. He does falter. He does fail. But in a lot of ways, there is a level of nobility to him because he is a hero. He does risk life and limb, granted for glory and for treasure and all that. But that's not necessarily inherently a bad thing. Now, obviously, Beowulf's other actions during the course of this film are extremely questionable. Instead of rejecting Grendel's mother's offer and being seduced by her, he succumbs to it. But how many men or even women have succumbed to the wilds of another? It shows that we are human. We are not perfect. Now, and I say this with no bragging or pride. I have been with my wife, well, we'll be in a couple of weeks for 7 years. And we have been together 8. And I never have once, nor will I ever be unfaithful to her. Because that's been done to me. And that's one of the worst feelings a person can go through. And I would not want it visited on somebody else, particularly my spouse. And since we're on that topic here, we will discuss for anything the character of hang on one second, I need to look up her name. Robin Wright's character, Weefloaf, I believe is how you pronounce her name. Obviously, these are a lot of old English names, so if I get the pronunciations not quite perfect, please forgive me. But Rothgar's wife, I think, is about the only truly sympathetic character in this entire story. Except from, well, no, not even her per se. Well, maybe Beowulf's right hand man, Weeglove. But Hrothgar's wife, which would eventually become Beowulf's wife, she is probably one of the only really completely sympathetic characters in this story, aside from Beowulf's best friend, because she is stuck in a loveless marriage. Do I think there might have been a time where Hrothgar did care for her? Maybe. But as he's gotten older and gotten more wild and more rambunctious, if you want to put it that way, all he sees her as is a means to sire an heir and little else. Now, this unfortunately was often the time how most women were viewed in the world at this period. Thankfully, that's not a attitude that we have anymore, at least largely. Women are seen as their own person. They have their autonomy. They have their own voice. They have their own say. And that's a good thing, obviously. But in terms of Hrothgar's wife, she has to live with the shame that her husband succumbed to the wilds of a hideous and ugly monster, though that monster took a pleasing shape to seduce him. And when she first sees Grendel and she realizes the relationship between Grendel and Hrothgar, it breaks her. And I think it would break any person, honestly. And granted, obviously, I'm not a woman, but I do feel for her in this from this perspective. The person that she was betrothed to, the person that we would assume at one point did love, was unfaithful to her. And now she sees the proof of that infidelity in all its ghastly, gnarled flesh. And when Hrothgar challenges Grendel to kill him or at least fight him, Grendel says no. And that's when Hrothgar's wife realizes the connection and the validation, though that validation is horrible, that her spouse was unfaithful to her. And then to compound that error or compound that sin, if you want to categorize it as such, Beowulf commits the same exact sin. He's unfaithful to Wheatloaf. And there's a very interesting conversation before the last big climactic battle of the movie. And it's between Wheatloaf and Beowulf's younger mistress. And she says to Beowulf's mistress, "You need not flee from me. I'm not going to bite you. I understand what you are and what you mean to my husband." And you can't help but feel a slight pang of pity for Beowulf's mistress, because she's just as much trapped in this situation as everyone else is. She loves Beowulf in her own way, I would imagine, just as Wiglaf loves Beowulf, or might have loved him at one time. And there's a very interesting moment also during this section of the movie. It's before Beowulf goes to face off against his son, the dragon the monster that he sired with Grendel's mother, which in this case takes the form of a dragon. And he says to her, I absolutely love this scene and this exchange. Beowulf says to Wiglaf, "Keep a memory of me, not as a warrior or a hero or even a king, but just as a man, flawed and imperfect." And she consents. She agrees to do that for him, for what they could have been at one time. And then, of course, he goes off to face his son, to face the dragon that he made, that is now wreaking havoc on his kingdom, just as Grendel wreaked havoc on Hrothgar's kingdom. And Beowulf sacrifices his own life, slays a dragon, saves the kingdom, saves his wife, saves his mistress, and he is given a proper Viking funeral. He's placed in a longboat with a accumulation of all his treasure and wealth and trophies and everything else, and then molten fire is poured from a cliffside onto the ship. And as it catches fire and sets out to sea, you see the ship being consumed by the flames. But amongst the flames of that fire, we see a figure float in, and we have no other name for Grendel's mother, save simply Grendel's mother. And she's kissing the corpse of Beowulf. And Beowulf's best friend, Wiglaf, is standing there on the shore, actually on the beach, looking out over the sea. And there's a very interesting non-vocal exchange between Wiglaf and Grendel's mother. Hang on, maybe there is a name for her. I don't know. Hang on. Nope. No other name for her. Okay. I didn't think so, but I wanted to make sure. But they leave it on a cliffhanger that I believe shouldn't be resolved. But it does beg the question, will Wiglaf make the same mistakes that his own dear close friend Beowulf did? Or will he be the one that breaks the cycle? And we don't know, because that's where the story ends, essentially. And I'm I can't speak to personal experience to ever having to deal with something like this. Well, maybe, yeah, maybe in a way I have, and I'll say this here briefly. And no, I'm not going to be throwing shade at anyone or calling anybody out. That's not my intention here. I'm using this as an example. Nothing more, nothing less. There have been a few opportunities where I could have grabbed at easy fame here on YouTube online. I could have gone down a very different path than the one I have chosen. To say I was tempted, I was not tempted at all would be a lie. I did consider it. But in the end, I had to ask myself this very important question, and unfortunately, I don't know if Beowulf or his friend or even Hrothgar may be considered this. Is notoriety and fame and prestige worth your soul, if you believe in such a thing, which I do, but worth your reputation, worth your name, and worth the destruction they could potentially bring? And in the final outcome, I chose against taking the easy road, going after the cheap and easy acclaim and prestige here on YouTube. And I chose my own road. And I do not regret that. Because I was raised a lot different. I was raised differently. I was raised to believe that your word, your reputation, your accountability to those around you is more important than any fleeting glory or fame that you might gain by going down the easy road. And you might ask yourself, if you're watching this live or if you catch us on the replay, well, Ambassador, what makes you what gives you the right to judge anybody if they have done what you have just described? And I say, to answer that, I say this here and now: I'm not judging anyone. I'm not calling anybody out. That is not my, as I say, that's not my intention here. I'm using this as an example in the context of this movie. As I said, and this will be the last time I mention it, and we'll move on. Did I consider the easy path? Yes, I did. But my own conscience, my own reputation, my name, my word, and what my family and my friends think of me means more than fleeting, passing prestige. And I think maybe if Beowulf and Hrothgar had asked that question of themselves, they probably could have saved their kingdoms a lot of grief and heartache. Now, granted, we wouldn't have had much of a story, obviously, because that is kind of the point of this particular adaptation of Beowulf, to ask the question: is glory and prestige and fame worth all the heartache and tragedy that will come along with it because of the bargain that you made? and particularly in this case, with the person that Hrothgar and Beowulf made that deal, a demon, a monster. Now we don't know if this is a demon from hell, or if this is some sort of Norse take on a genie, where if you make a deal or you make the wish, there's a price attached later on. That's a possibility too, because such creatures, such myths do exist. So I have to say, with all sincerity, I applaud Robert Zemeckis and his choice to adapt the story in the direction that he did. Because while there's a lot of great action sequences and the story itself, just from that perspective, is very gripping. It's very intriguing. It's a lot of fun. It's fun to see Beowulf fight against Grendel and the sea monsters, and eventually against his own son, the dragon. It's interesting to see the intrigue of the infighting at Hrothgar's court between Unferth and Beowulf. But what I find more interesting is the ethical conversation that is taking place in this film. And that's the one I just spent the last little bit breaking down for you all. And I think that's what makes this movie somewhat timeless and very timely, because it is a moral story. It's a play on ethics. And I think that's okay. I think that's something that we all should take time to discuss amongst ourselves and consider, because we would be the better for it if we do. So, but that's that's kind of my thoughts on Beowulf. For those of you that will catch us on the replay, I do encourage you, if you've never watched this, and I hope I haven't necessarily ruined the film for you, or spoilers don't make a difference to you, and you do want to see how the story itself plays out. I have mentioned a few scenes here and there, but if you have never watched it, or it's been a long time since you have watched it, I do encourage you to do so, because it's a story that I think can speak to all of us, regardless of our age or what generation we are part of, or any of those other categories. Now, I do want to, now that I do want to spend a few more minutes with you all before I do wrap this up, because I've basically at this point given my thoughts on Beowulf. But I do want to discuss a few other things with you all in terms of the channel itself and a few projects that I am currently working on. We are obviously closing in on 500 subscribers. We are 12 away. So, as I said yesterday afternoon with the Babylon 5 stream, I say again here, share this stream out, share the link out with your friends. And if you enjoy the work and the content that I am putting up on this channel every week, encourage your friends to come check it out too, if you think it is worthy of their time. Once we get to 500, I will be doing a watch along for Galaxy Quest. I will be doing my first giveaway, and I will tell you all now, I have decided on a prize for that giveaway. And I will be getting a 4K copy of one of my all-time favorite movies from the 1990s, and that is The Fifth Element. And at the recommendation of Madam Ambassador, we will add in a bonus prize with that movie. I won't tell you all right now what it is, but I will tell you it is movie related. And that's all I will say. But along with all that, to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit to not necessarily take away some of the mystique from the ambassadorial wing, I will be doing a reveal. And as my first name. Now, there are a handful of people here online who do know me by my proper first name, not just simply as the ambassador. But I've been doing this for a little over or almost 3 years now. And I figured 500 is a nice round number to do that reveal. Also, I'm working on a few scripts or anything for some upload videos. I'm getting back into doing uploads as well as live streams because I honestly have missed doing that type of content for you all because I know not everybody has the time to tune in for a live stream. I am currently working on a follow-up video to my Blade Runner 2049 live stream that I did a few weeks ago. That will be uploaded here within the next week or so. I am also working on another installment in my Ultra Retro review series. And we will be continuing on with that series because I am enjoying it. I hope those of you that are watching it are also enjoying it as we look back beyond the 80s and the 90s to the film industry of yesteryear from the 1930s to the 1970s. And I'll be doing an upload video. I'll be doing a video and everything on a very much a cult classic film from my childhood. Well, actually, yeah, I was about a year old when it originally released. And it is the Disney film, The Black Hole. So that'll be coming up in the near future as well. And I've got a few other things I am working on besides that, but don't want to discuss them just yet because I'm still putting the pieces together. But I do want to let y'all know I will be doing another movie series review, and we are going to dig into the X-Men films. And that's the ones from the late 90s going into the 2000s. That includes X-Men, X2, X-Men United, X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, X-Men Apocalypse. Yes, I like X-Men Apocalypse, so yes, I'm going to review it. I'll also be doing reviews for the Wolverine and for Logan. Now, you might be asking, well, Ambassador, you're skipping 2 or 3 films there. Yes, I am. I acknowledge that. I am skipping X-Men Last Stand. I am skipping X-Men Origins Wolverine, and I am skipping X-Men Dark Phoenix. Now, I might do maybe some shorter videos on that, but I won't necessarily dedicate an entire live stream to those films. Because honestly, I prefer to give my time to films that are, I think, at least from my point of view, worth the conversation and the time to put together a live stream for. Now, I might do, like I mentioned, I'll do something shorter in terms of Last Stand, Origins Wolverine, and Dark Phoenix. But the others I will be doing live streams for. And I will be doing another couples review for X-Men Days of Future Past with Madam Ambassador, because that movie has a very special connection with us. It was actually the first movie me and her went to see when we first started dating. So we'll be doing a couples review for that film. We will also be doing a couples review for Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. That will be coming up once we get a chance to go see it. We will probably do a couples review for Thor: Love and Thunder. I am, and for those of you who might be wondering, why have I not done anything on Moon Knight? I know. I have been watching Moon Knight, and I will say this here briefly. I have enjoyed it. I do need to watch episode 4. I have not had a chance to. This week at work has just been an absolute slog, and I've been kind of tired, so I haven't had a chance to sit down and really give it the time and attention that it deserves. But I will say this here briefly. I have enjoyed Moon Knight, and once the series wraps, we will do a full review and discussion of the series, and I will give my thoughts, obviously, and I will put together a panel for that stream as well. So if you're interested in participating, reach out to me on social media, whether that is Twitter or Instagram, and let me know if you want to be a part of that panel. But we've got a lot coming up here on the ambassadorial wing. I will make one other announcement here now. I have been mulling over this for a little while, and I am going to do a limited line of merchandise. So, I'll probably do some caps, do some t-shirts, maybe do some mugs or stuff, because I do have the new icon for the channel, the AW, the crest, and everything, as I like to call it. So, and I might even do some stuff with my avatar here. Maybe I've got a couple little funny, goofy catchphrases I might throw on a t-shirt or something. But yes, there will be some merchandise for the ambassadorial wing. So, um, y'all have given me your time and attention. I want to give a little something back to y'all. So, but hmm? So, sorry, Madam Ambassador was asking me a question. Need to talk to her for a second. So, but I do want to thank you all who tuned in this evening. I hope you enjoyed the stream. For those of you that'll catch us on the replay, please leave your thoughts in the comment section down below with anything I brought up or anything I might have missed. And give me your thoughts on Robert Zemeckis' adaptation of Beowulf. So, but I do want to also let y'all know I will be going live tomorrow evening on an Orange Hat Reviews channel. I will be doing a movie review with him for one of my all-time favorite films from the 1970s, and it is a Mel Brooks classic, and it is definitely a movie that could not be made nowadays. And we'll be doing a review of Mel Brooks's Blazing Saddles, and that'll be at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. So hope to see you all over there on Orange Hat's channel. So, but with all that being said, folks, I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. You all have a great night. Have a great weekend. I will catch you all next time. And until next time, be ambassadorial. And this is the Ambassador, signing off.
I have always been